every situation is different. And so if we saw things that concerned us in any of those reviews, certainly that one and only incident would be enough for us to sound the alarm and take appropriate action if we felt we need to.
Talk to me about how you first found out about this incident from a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, so I became aware of a complaint from Mr. Turner as it kind of escalated up the chain. I know initially there was an informal complaint filed and closed out, and then Mr. Turner called back up here to escalate it to a formal complaint, and that's when I became aware of it.
Have you had a chance to look at the video of what happened, and kind of what did you think when you watched that video?
Yeah, I have watched the video, listened to the 911 recording, and it's extremely unfortunate that Mr. Turner was caught up in the middle of something that he did not deserve. That's the first thing I would say. I will say we've taken multiple opportunities to apologize to Mr. Turner for the chaos and the circumstances that led us to his apartment. But it really is an unfortunate set of circumstances that caused us to have to interact with him that evening.
Can you help folks understand what those circumstances were, how officers ended up knocking on his door?
Sure. We were dispatched to a disturbance in progress that evening, and the reporting party was providing information that a female was being beaten, and she could hear screaming, and that there was a male assaulting a female, and she reported, her initial comments were that, she didn't know if it was coming from beside or above her apartment, but after those initial comments, she made about 4 different comments saying that it's coming from above my apartment, which is what led us to Mr. Turner's apartment. And so, the officers were responding to where they were directed to go, which is a different scenario than, if we're dispatched to apartment number 1 and we go to apartment number 2, that's a different scenario. But in this scenario, we were dispatched to that Mr. Turner's apartment specifically based on information that we had.
The officers went to the apartment they were told to go to.
Absolutely.
That was not a mistake they made. It was something that happened through the communication.
Correct. Yes.
Is there anything, watching that video, is there anything you wish your officers had done differently?
Yeah, so we have the right, the case law to support warrantless entry into an apartment. Under the circumstances, there was exigency in this case.
What does that mean?
It just means that there's an immediate threat to life, or someone's being hurt, and there's an immediate need for us to go in and investigate that. And so, based on the information that was provided to the officers, we had legal reason to go in that apartment. Now, I will say, as we look back on it, we could have communicated that exigency a little bit better to Mr. Turner, and really kind of explain the implications of what that means. We could have taken the time to say, hey, we cannot leave here until we go in and verify there's not a victim in that apartment. Because the ramifications of us not investigating and not checking to see if there's a victim in there are pretty severe, right? And unfortunately, there's a lot of domestic violence victims out there that have a lens on that, and we can't just walk away. We have to verify that there's nobody in that apartment that is seriously injured, that may need medical attention. So that's why we can't just walk away from those situations. I think, in hindsight, communicating the reasons why we have to check the apartment, maybe asking Mr. Turner, hey, do you want to check the apartment with us? Do you want to walk with us? But explaining to him, we can't leave until we know that there's nobody hurt in this apartment.
That's what you wish would have happened.
That's what I wish we could have communicated better. The officers perceived that he was trying to close the door in their face, and that's why the officer pushed the issue, because he perceived that the door was about to close, and then that was going to complicate things and further delay us verifying there was no victim inside.
Because if the door is closed, then you have to figure out how you're going to get inside and go from there.
That's correct.
There are some folks who watch that video and who are going to hear this who say, wait a second, I thought that I had a constitutional right. I thought you guys had to get a warrant. What was different about this circumstance?
The exigency and really just the information that the officers had that was reported not by ourselves, but reported by a third party who was witnessing what she thought was a female being beaten. And our actions were out of concern for a victim.
You talked about what you wish might have happened differently here. As you look at this circumstance, is there anything the department hopes to learn from this?
Yeah, so we're going to work on some communication scenarios in our training. That's the big takeaway from this is really just the communication of, okay, we have exigent circumstances, we have the legal grounds to go into the apartment, but we need to do a better job of communicating those exigent circumstances and the significance of that so people have a clearer understanding of, we can't go anywhere until we verify that there's nobody inside. And so that's one takeaway. The other takeaway is, our complaint process. We've identified some things related to that, how to escalate this type of complaint from other types of complaints. The majority of the complaints that we get are, people that are unhappy about getting a citation. And so differentiating this in some way from this type of complaint from those types of complaints, I think would give this a lot more scrutiny and allow us a quicker response to review it and be extremely thorough in how we review it. And so, the training and communication, and the complaint process, and some changes to policy related to forced entry. So typically, we viewed forced entry as we're physically kicking in a door, right, or using a breaching tool to get into a door. In this case, this was a forced entry. It wasn't either of those things that I just described. But by considering it a forced entry, it makes it, there's automatically reports that are done, right? And so there's an information report at least, if not an offense report, and then we have what's called a blue team system where a forced entry is reviewed by several layers of supervision as well.
I want to repeat some of that back to you so make sure I understand it right. So it sounds like you're saying we want to look at some of our training and talk about communication in a circumstance like this.
Yes.
Look at our complaint process, figure out how to separate stuff like this from the kind of regular complaints.
Right.
And finally, consider pushing your way into an apartment a forced entry.
Yes.
And what does that trigger?
That just triggers the additional documentation and supervisory review that puts it at a higher level of scrutiny than just an encounter like just a verbal disturbance encounter. It puts a higher level of scrutiny on it and a review.
You mentioned the review. This incident was something the department reviewed. What did you look at and what did you find?
So we looked at a lot of things. So we obviously do a comprehensive review of the officers involved. We went back 5 years and looked at their history, which you have, and I provided that. And we look for trends. One of the officers involved in this, almost 11,000 calls for service. He's only used force 23 times. And over 300 arrest situations, which is incredibly low. So that leads us to a place where we can't view that officer as overly aggressive, right? We look at racial breakdown on traffic stops. We look at racial profiling complaint history. Neither one of these officers had racial profiling complaints up until this incident. So we look at all of those things as a comprehensive review of their discipline, complaints they might receive. And so we look at all those things to identify, is there any trends here that we need to be concerned about? And in our review, there was none.
You brought up some of this history. One of the officers, and I want to make sure I'm saying his name right, is it Officer Schick?
Yes.
Officer Schick, in this circumstance, you looked back at 5 years. Some of that information we got as well. There were, I think, 3 different incidents where folks had complained about excessive force prior to this. At what point, how do I want to phrase this question? At what point do complaints, even ones the department cleared him of, become a concerning trend for you?
Well, obviously, it's not just the complaints, right? We would look at, we review every use of force situation. So they're all automatically reviewed before a complaint is even made. And they're reviewed by the chain of command, and then they're reviewed by a panel of our response to resistance committee, which is made up of a supervisor, training person, and then a defensive tactics training person. So they're holistically reviewing each of those use of force incidents in advance of any complaint. And so, throughout that review process, we would identify if there's a training need, or if there's some other misconduct that we need to look into. When the complaints come in, obviously that's another review of this particular incident. And each of those things, every situation is different. And so if we saw things that concerned us in any of those reviews, certainly that one and only incident would be enough for us to sound the alarm and take appropriate action if we felt we need to.
And just so I make sure I understand, you looked back at these past incidents, the past complaints on there, and looked for, as you said, kind of looked at the different data, looked at how this all played out. At what point does 4 complaints become a concerning trend? What's the number that makes it become a trend for you?
I wouldn't say there's a magic number. I mean, because like I said, we look at every single one of these complaints individually, and we do multiple reviews through multiple different people. I think Officer Schick total had 6 complaints out of 11,000 calls for service. Is pretty good. I mean, that's pretty good, and I would venture to guess that whether it's 6 or whether it's 16, that's very low from a percentage standpoint. That's less than point. I think if my math is correct, it's like less than 0.03% or something like that. So while there's a number, it's really about each individual incident and making sure that you're looking holistically at each individual use of force, not just raised from a complaint.
I would not test you on the math. That is not my strong suit so I believe you on that. Just a couple quick more questions for you. Mm-hmm. I know you talked with Mr. Turner earlier this week and talked him through some of this. What would your message be to him?
Yeah, well, first of all, like I said before, we apologize for him being caught up in a situation and circumstances that he did not deserve. And we explained the outcome of the review. We walked through the why behind what we did, the ramifications if we were to walk away, and there was a victim behind there, the case law that supports our decision to go in. We explained all those things, but the apology for him being caught up in a situation that he didn't deserve, I think, was the biggest thing. And really where we left the meeting was, we certainly don't agree on all the circumstances, and I have to give Mr. Turner a lot of credit for his compliance. He clearly didn't agree with what our officers were doing that night, but he complied. And then later for his assistance. I mean, he helped us find the source of the disturbance that night, and so we got to give him credit for that in addition to the apology. And I think where we left the meeting was, where can we find some common ground? Because certainly we can articulate the legal reasons behind something, but it's not lost on us that the communication aspect is important, and we want to find some common ground so that at least he feels heard, and we hear him, and we identify, and we're certainly willing as an agency to look within ourselves and look for areas of improvement, and we articulated those things to him.
Do you think there's common ground to be found?
I think there is. Absolutely. I think there is. And, Mr. Turner certainly has to process everything and, as he described it, healing from this incident. And, we want to allow him the time to do that, but certainly we would welcome, dialogue with him in the future on what that common ground might be. One
of the things that I think Obviously, this impacted Mr. Turner. Lots of other people have now seen this video and heard this story. What would your message be to other folks here in Frisco who are looking at this and saying, gosh, I don't want that to happen to my family?
Sure. No, I think what I would say to the other people watching is, certainly this was a unique and not common set of circumstances, right? But I think it's important that, we're certainly transparent as an agency. We ask for people to be transparent. If we end up at an apartment with a report of a disturbance, especially one as severe as this one, be willing to comply, open the door to the officers. Let's alleviate some of that perceived exigency that we've had communicated to us, so that, we can work together, clear the apartment, and be on our way. I mean, this incident was 2 minutes and 16 seconds. Maybe if we open the door, work together, we can get in and out of there in less than a minute, and just be satisfied that we're not leaving a victim in that apartment, because that's our big concern. Like I said, the ramifications of us walking away and there being a victim inside, really are serious. And like I said, there's a lot of domestic violence victims out there that can certainly offer some perspective on that.
So is there anything else about this incident that you think folks should understand?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. And I think, the biggest thing is for people to understand there's a difference between us going to the wrong apartment and us going to an apartment that we were directed to, that in hindsight we know,
Was wrong.
Wasn't the source of the disturbance. I think that's a unique distinction that a lot of people perceive, that we just went to the wrong apartment, and that's not accurate.
Went to the apartment that the officers were told to go to.
Correct.
Is there anything that could prevent something like that from happening?
I think in this circumstance, no. I mean, the dispatcher certainly asked a lot of questions, confirmed, do you think this is coming from above you? And the reporting party says, I think so. And so in the dispatcher's mind, she's relaying that information onto the officers, and that was confirmation that we were going to the right place. And so I think, that's the biggest thing, is these things are all happening very fast. These are very dynamic situations. We have the benefit of hindsight now, having looked at things from a lot of different angles and reviewing the video and 911 calls several times. But these officers and dispatchers are having to make judgment calls in split seconds, and they're doing the best with the information that's provided to them at that moment.